Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey, g'day everyone, good morning and happy Saturday. Quick intro for you. I wouldn't say this is an emergency podcast broadcast, but this one's pretty important. Yesterday I recorded this interview with Mr. Shannon Everett, one of the three principals behind an organization I've come across as of late called American Truckers United. ATU has been doing some pretty interesting research where it concerns the flooding of the North American trucking market with drivers who aren't from here and who have a disturbing correlation with a rise in collisions and other incidents out on the highway involving trucks and a depression or suppression of American truck drivers' wages across the board. You may have seen Shannon on Twitter. He posts some incredible graphs from his info. In the podcast here today, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of the results of Shannon's research and ask some pointed questions about our policymakers and leaders about why we're letting this happen. I want everybody to think about this as an opportunity and think about it optimistically about what we can do to make our industry better and what we can do to close all these gaping loopholes that have been used since at least 2016 to allow this to happen, and for you to contact your local and state and federal representatives and say, do something about this. As many of you know, the American Trucking Association and their smaller state associations, who are all related, have been running the table on lobbying the government, and supposedly in the interests of the trucking industry, but really who their interest is themselves and their customers, in order to keep the cheap freight paradigm on our roads and basically screw you, the driver. As Shannon says in the podcast here, there's nobody in Washington representing actual truckers, and so it's going to be up to us to step up and deal with it. So when you're done listening to this, I have a huge favor to ask all of you. Share it amongst your fellow truckers, put it on social media, blast it on your trucking Facebook groups, on Twitter, on Reddit, wherever you happen to be. Pass it around back channel. I know a lot of truckers are typically lean, a little bit older, middle-aged. Maybe you're not on social media. Pass it to your friends. Send it to your managers, like trucking company owners, especially if you own small and medium-sized companies. It's your interest to make sure these problems are addressed. Otherwise, you just might be out of business here soon. Everyone's getting squeezed. We're not out of the great freight recession that started in 2022 yet. And Shannon outlines how there's actually 2 or 3 different trucking industries happening in America that are all running parallel to each other. And the average small fleet, independent owner operator or medium-sized company are getting squeezed by the megas and by this other universe of trucking companies who are owned by foreign entities, hauling loads for load brokerages that are offshore and insourcing their own labor to drive trucks in the United States, using all of these loopholes. And amazingly enough, Shannon identifies how various states are actually trying to make it easier for them to do this. It's quite incredible. We went for almost 2 hours. Extremely important show. Shannon and his team are doing great work over at ATU, and we really need to get the word out about this. So please spread this around. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to Shannon's American Truckers United website. All of the links will be in the show notes. His website's free. His mailing list is free. I'm not asking you guys for any money. And just, spread the word. Sign up. Get yourself informed. And say something. Speak up. Your industry is being subverted from within, and it's in your power to do something about it. All right, folks, let's get to it. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. Got a really special one here for you today. I've been engaging with this gentleman online now, sort of working together on Twitter to spread the word about a issue that's very near and dear to my audience, to myself, to all my fellow truckers and the motoring public, about a pretty major problem we have on Canadian and American highways with untrained and pretty low quality truckers, and how they got here, why they're here, and who allowed them, who gave them their CDLs, what's the impetus behind all of this stuff. And the gentleman I'm about to speak with has been doing some pretty deep dive research at various state DMVs, cleaning up government websites, looking for information and packaging it all for everybody, analyzing the data. They've got a great website. Please welcome to the show the other voice you're going to hear today, Mr. Shannon Everett from American Truckers United. Welcome to the show, sir.
Good morning, Gord. I really appreciate you having me this morning.
Yeah, no, man, I've been waiting for this one, chomping at the bit to talk to you, sir. Anyone who follows you on Twitter at ATU Truckers or has seen your website, American Truckers United, pretty much knows the score with what you've been up to. I figure if we have a chance to talk about this, we can dive deep into the details about exactly what's going on America's roads. But before we do that, maybe you could give us a little biography of yourself and, you know, your history in trucking and how you came to start ATU.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, I like to glorify the Lord in everything that I do. And so I guess I would start with the Lord's doing a mighty work in me. He's given me a new heart. And so I just want to praise him a little bit and just say to all of the American truckers out there that are listening, he's for us and he knows exactly what's going on. He knows about all of those who have been hurt, all of those who've been injured, the lives that have been lost. He knows about the trucking businesses that have been around for decades that have failed. He knows about the suppressed wages that are going on right now for the truck drivers and their families, the standards of living that has been reduced for many people. And he's going to restore all that. I have faith in that. And I believe that what we're experiencing across the country right now is a part of a revival. And so I just want to read some of God's word just over this podcast this morning, just over the American trucking community. Before I kind of get into who I am, I want to talk about how good God is.
You go for it, sir. Praise the Lord.
In his word in 2 Chronicles 7:14, he says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them from heaven. I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land." And so I think the very first thing that we should all focus on as a trucking community is the need for fellowship with the Lord. And fellowship with the Lord, in Matthew 6:33, the word says that seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. He's done a mighty work in me. I've been seeking his face, and so he's using me in a way to reach out to the trucking community to, number one, to lift his voice. And so I just thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate you letting me do that. Now, as far as who Shannon is in the flesh, I've been in the trucking industry for over 25 years. I'm the son of a trucker. And so I was quick to get my commercial driver's license at 18 years old. I received first the interstate license and couldn't do interstate commerce, but I was driving for my father in a small trucking company that he had, about 40 trucks. Worked my way up,
Yeah, likewise. I started when I was 18 as well.
Okay. All right. And so, just as soon as I could get a CDL, I went and got one because I was just enamored with what my dad was doing and his business. And I was always up there late at nights working on the docks and helping him. And so as soon as I could get into it, I got into it. And, I was able to move into the dispatch after a couple of years, got into dispatch for a little while, worked into sales. And that's where I really kind of found my niche was working in sales. And we took a fleet of 50 trucks and quickly expanded up to about 400. working in the automotive space. And so most all of my experience over time has been dealing with automotive freight. And then, we sold that business in 2014 to a public company. I stayed on and managed that for 5 years. We grew it from 400 to almost 1,000 trucks. And so most all of the business that I was involved in was cross-border business. And so I have a lot of experience in cross-border freight. I have a lot of experience in immigration, and I have a lot of experience in export and imports, what it takes, the documentation that it takes to bring loads into the United States and to take them out of the United States. And so I think I have a unique perspective of the industry, given my experience in that trade. And so when this all first started happening recently, when I talk about the freight recession, when I say what started happening recently, as a lot of carriers started really struggling, some of my friends talking to them on the phone and stuff, they're like, man, this doesn't seem normal. This seems like a prolonged cycle. This is not our typical freight cycle. I had some experience in my previous life with the cross-border trade stuff that gave me a different perspective that they didn't have, and that's kind of the beginning of that. I would say that if we go to in 2014, I fell out to a public company, have a 5-year contract that expires in 2019. But in 2019, at that same time that was expiring, I was losing a lot of contracts to these non-citizen drivers, fleets using non-citizen drivers. And so I'd gone around speaking to some of our representatives and legislators like, hey, as a matter of fact, if you just do some research, you'll see that there's reports of me laying off 450 drivers in one swoop as we lost contracts. And so I'd met with some legislators complaining, hey, this doesn't seem right. There's got to be some loopholes here. What's going on? And I was surprised at how much no one seemed to want to support any action or to do anything to protect all of that. And of course, I was in the NAFTA trade lanes, and so everybody was NAFTA. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe I've got it all wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe I just need to quit trying to fight this NAFTA cycle, and I need to get off into another vertical. So I left and got into a more regional type freight operation that I saw a lot of other trucking operators doing, and said, okay, I'll go over here and I won't be in that lane, and maybe I won't be impacted. And that did work for a couple of years, and it seemed to be going well. And then the freight recession came, and then again, going back to what my friends were saying, like, what's going on? What's different here? Well, I had the knowledge of what was happening in my old business. And so it's like, well, if that was still coming, I bet it's starting to flow into the other stuff. If there's no cap on how many of these guys are operating in the United States, I'm sure that's spreading out into these other verticals by now. And so we talked about that a little bit. Of course, I wasn't doing anything about it. Wasn't working on anything. But there was a crash. There was a crash in Colorado, and it was national news. It hit my TV screen, and it was the crash of Scott Miller. Scott Miller was in his personal vehicle, and he was driving home when a out of control truck hit him with a flatbed load, and the load come off the truck, landed on Scott Miller's cab and crushed him and killed him. And come to find out, the driver of the truck was not a citizen, had been deported 16 times, was under deportation orders at the time of the accident. And man, it just, like I said, God had really been doing a mighty thing in me and in my heart, and just like what kind of his mission for me in life is loving on people and serving people. And when I saw that with my background in it, I was like, man, I could probably help those people. And I just felt a strong tug, like, you need to pick this back up. You need to look at what's going on here and see if you can help. And so I did that. I reached out to the family. I didn't hear from them right away. Actually, I didn't hear from them for 6 months. But I tried to connect with them. But I immediately started doing research, and I did research into where I had access, and that was Arkansas. And I started researching the crashes that were going on in Arkansas, and I immediately found this other crash. This crash was not publicized. There was one short paragraph about a crash in the local newspaper, but this was the crash of Mark Bryant. And Mark Bryant was he worked for Arkansas State University. He was driving home one night when a truck crossed the center line and hit him head on. The driver of the truck was from Honduras. The driver of the truck had only been in the country for about 4 days, did not have a commercial driver's license, was non-citizen, still had his belongings from when he'd come across the border. He was living in the truck. When they arrested the driver and took him to the police precinct, they called up the company. The company was from Oklahoma. This driver was on a domestic point-to-point load in the United States, and they asked the company for a copy of his driver's license. They sent over a fake ID, and so they knew the driver's license was fraudulent because the issuance date, I think, was for the exact date of the wreck or sometime in that conflicting time frame. And so not only did we have a non-citizen driver here, we had an evidence of licensing fraud. We had cabotage where they're hauling a domestic load point to point in the United States. This wasn't a foreign carrier from Mexico or Canada involved in cross-border freight. No, this was a U.S. domiciled carrier. And it's like, my goodness, what is going on? I've been unplugged for a while from this world, but this is really getting out of hand. And I say all that to say this too, like when we start overlooking laws and we stop enforcement on certain laws, and I'll get into one of the things that I think started the root of all this and how we got here, but it leads into this lawlessness, and it spreads like a cancer throughout the system. And so as soon as I saw the Mark Bryant case, I reached out to that family, immediately got a hold of that family and said, I want to help y'all. I talked to their attorneys. I talked to the state police in Arkansas, trying to get details about exactly what was going on. And I talked to one of my friends who owns his own trucking company, and I said, hey, would you work with me? Let's rally some people, and let's start speaking up for the people who are being hurt, and let's start speaking up for the American truck drivers who are losing their jobs. So ultimately, we started American Truckers United because when I tried to go to some of our special interest groups before to get help and to our legislators, there was no one willing to help.
When you say special interest groups, like, do you mean like industry groups, like say the Arkansas Trucking Association, the American Trucking Association, OIDA, any of those guys?
Yeah, I'm going to keep them named at special interest groups for the moment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and so I couldn't get any help from any of those groups, and so I was telling my partner, it's like, man, I guess we're going to have to start our own. We didn't want to start our own organization, but we saw that there was absolutely no voice out there for the victims of these truck crashes and for these American truck drivers and their families who are being devastated through all this exploitation of non-citizen truck drivers.
Right. Yeah. You saw a hole in the market. I mean, that's how I kind of came to meet you. And I started fooling around with Twitter a few years ago. Just for your own information, I've seen some of the same things going on in Canada. And then also there's, as you say, there's reasons for this going on. And if you go back from, the NAFTA and the non-domiciled drivers and all that, it goes deeper. Why would we bother bringing those people? Well, one of the reasons is that the trucking industry, and probably some of those very same special interest groups that you'd rather not name, have been complaining about something called the truck driver shortage for 4 decades. And I started investigating this on my own, and I started a Substack, and I've been writing for a few different outlets. And it turns out that the truck driver shortage narrative is totally bunkum. There's nothing to it. There never has been. There's always been a ton of drivers around and people with CDLs, Americans and Canadians in Canada. And the problem is that under our sort of modern economic political paradigm, where nobody cares about anybody anymore, it's all globalism and shipping jobs overseas, they couldn't, you can't get rid of truck drivers. So how are they going to affect the same wage arbitrage against domestic truckers when you can't ship their jobs overseas, well, it's time to import them from overseas. Or another thing they've been doing, which is sort of my beat, is financing CDL mills with taxpayer dollars under the, you know, under the reasoning that, oh, there's not enough truck drivers. And in America, there's this culture where, hey, if someone's getting a job, that's an unalloyed good. Nobody ever asks any questions. As long as you got a job, it's like a sort of, it's downstream of the old Protestant work ethic, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but nobody ever questions anything. If a politician or a company says we're creating jobs, they don't ask how good they are. They don't ask how much they pay. They don't ask any questions why. So these large corporate lobby groups and their members keep coming back to Uncle Sam and their states and their municipalities. Hey, we don't have enough truck drivers. In a market economy, there's no such thing as a shortage of anything. You just pay more for it and then you get what you need. They don't want to pay. They just don't, because they believe that they should be able to take advantage of the same wage and labor arbitrage that their customers get away with by having manufacturing and supply facilities in other countries. That truck driver shortage narrative has been with us for decades. And we'll get to this part about the Biden, trucker task force or whatever the heck it was called. It goes to the highest levels. That they continue to believe this, even though there's over 10 million Americans with CDL right now, and there's only about roughly 2.2 to 2.5 million truck driving jobs, and then another maybe 800,000 to a million jobs which require a CDL, utility trucks, various other occupational trucks that need that license. But basically, there's somewhere between 3 and 5 times as many CDLs in existence in the United States of American drivers as there are jobs for them. Why do we keep importing these people? Why do we allow, Guatemalans and Mexicans and, guys from Eastern Europe? Why is all this going on? And your investigations into it, I think, are revealing.
Yeah. So, once we officially got started and we started diving into the reality of the truck crashes and the counts, it kind of led us down that path to discovering what you're talking about there and what you're elaborating on with the driver counts. And so the very first thing that we observed though was the truck crash count. And so as we started investigating, we found this chart of truck crashes that I'd never seen before this investigation that said that truck crashes were through the roof. And I was like, how in the world? I'm from the trucking world. And so I know what American truck drivers are going through. I know what American trucking company owners are going through. We're investing in all kinds of technologies to avoid truck accidents. We're being forced to do the e-log mandate, which, hey, I support. I don't support the current hours of service regulations as they're structured, but I do support, the fact that we have technology today to utilize that and to manage it and to keep up with all of it. But so we have the e-log mandate. We have a ridiculous hours of service regulation. We have driver facing and forward facing cameras, which are ridiculous. We have lane departures warning systems. We have collision mitigation systems in our trucks. And so we're investing in all this technology. We're investing in all of these additional labor costs that come with complying with these regulations. We're doing all these things. How is it possible that the fatal truck crash count can be up? And so I was absolutely blown away when I saw that chart for the first time. And I told my partner, I was like, man, this is big. This is the root. This is all connected. And then we find the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration memo. And so there was a memorandum issued in 2016 specific to what we're discussing. And that was the law that currently states that you have to be able to read and speak English was not changed, but there was a memorandum issued by an administration's agency saying don't enforce the law. And so I couldn't believe my eyes when I read that. It's just like, hey, we know this is the law, but we don't want you to follow it. And if a driver can communicate with the officer, we consider that to be sufficient to comply with this law. And, the idea of the law was never so that the communication with the officer would be easy. I'm sure that's a part of it. I mean, we want these law enforcement officers to be able to communicate with these guys. Absolutely. But I think the core to that law was so that these I know the core of that law was so that these drivers would be able to read our highway signs and warning signs. And so we consider that to be a monumental policy change for the industry, not a law change. Again, this is something that can easily be repealed and reversed, but a policy change that was implemented at that time. And so we took that time and that date and we benchmarked it on that chart and said, okay, what does it look like before that and after that? And again, it was like, man, that is it. That there is a significant change in this industry and in this workforce starting at that time. And so we believe that was done in an effort to allow what was already kind of starting to creep in to flood in. And so in all of our further research, we've been able to continue to pivot off of that point and see the trends established from there. And it all supports exactly what we've been saying.
Well, on that memorandum, I just want to play devil's advocate because myself and other people online have seen it, and thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention. We bump into people who are like, bedazzled by technology, and I think some of the regulators in the FMCSA might be going along with this. Is that their argument is, well, you can have a translator on your phone app. It's racist to expect people to speak English. There's tons of Hispanic Americans already here that drive around and they speak Spanish, and then French drivers from Quebec, and why this focus now? But once you start digging into it, you see example after example. So we have this flood damage to Interstate 40 in North Carolina and Tennessee. Huge stretch of I-40 has been closed while they're rebuilding it. And this driver comes in, ignores all the warning signs, and ends up driving into the construction zone and gets all tangled up in there. And the police show up and they find out recent immigrant, did not speak English. And when they ask him what they were doing there and why he didn't, pay attention to the signs, the driver just kept pointing at his GPS. And, you cannot just depend on a Google Translate app on your phone, right? And we see other examples of this with the last couple of winters. There's been these viral videos of all these trucks getting parked up on Donner Pass in California, right? Nevada DOT, California DOT, all the TV stations, all the weather bands, everything online keeps telling people there's massive storms coming in here. It's wintertime, either don't come here or park at the truck stop in Sparks. Stay in California for a couple days till we get it cleared. It goes out everywhere. Everybody gets days and days of warning about this stuff. And then you see hundreds of trucks stuck, blown right in on Interstate 80. How did this happen? Well, I bet you would agree with me that the majority of those drivers up there either don't speak English or operating on one of these non-domicile CDLs, or they're just stupid. What do you figure?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to them being unable to operate in the environment because they can't understand our road signs and our traffic signs. There's also a recent example going on in Wyoming with the tunnel crash, where they were detouring around the tunnel crash, and there was another accident in the detour of the tunnel crash where a guy went around. I'm sure he couldn't understand the signs of the curve and everything. He misses the curve, drives straight through the curve, and we've got more accidents. And so, I think the great analogy here is comparing the trucking industry to another industry that has to go across, country zones and things of that nature, and that's the airplane industry, the airlines. And so it is a requirement for everyone that has a pilot's license. I'm just a private pilot, but I was taught in my early training that it's a requirement worldwide as a commercial pilot to speak the English language. It doesn't matter if you're in Asia, in Mexico, in South America. They are required to speak English, not because of racism, not because English is the greatest language in the world, but because everyone understands that you have to have a universal language that works across these different cultures. so that everyone can operate safely, so that there's no misunderstanding of what's expected and what's to be done in all of these different time zones and areas. And so if that requirement is for our airlines, okay, why wouldn't we have that same understanding for our highways? There's more people being killed right now on these highways by truck accidents and fatal truck collisions than there are in all of the airplane crashes. The airlines are much safer right now than what we're seeing on the highways with these trucks. And I believe this is one of the major causes, because we're not using, if that standard works for airlines, why is it not simple enough for everybody to understand that we should have that same kind of universal understanding for our truck drivers?
But we do. It's a federal regulation to be able to proficiently communicate in English to have a commercial driver's license in the United States of America.
It is.
But effectively, it's not. See, the government does these dirty little tricks, right? They pick and choose what they get to enforce depending on the policy priorities of whoever's in charge, right? You see this in all other areas of life and areas of governance. And, they can just decide, well, it's too politically untenable to put this question to the voters or their representatives, right? This is why so much stuff ends up in the Supreme Court, because Congress don't ever want to vote anything. And so even with like smaller rules such as this, federal regulation requiring English, the Obama administration, for whatever reason they had, were like, nah, we're just not going to enforce it. And nobody got to vote on that. And the FMC and the FMCSA, I've been speaking with a gentleman who's a candidate to lead the FMCSA. His name's Lee Schmidt, been a trucker for over 30 years. I had Lee on my podcast, about him on my show a couple times. And Lee was telling me that there's been no continuity of leadership with the FMCSA. There's been 20-something different leaders at the FMCSA since they got rid of the old Interstate Chamber of Commerce, or whenever they changed it to the FMCSA. And right now they have an interim leader, and I think they're being audited, which is why President Trump hasn't assigned anybody to it yet. But nobody gets to vote for the FMCSA. And one of the things that really bothers me, you brought up the ELD mandate. I've been covering that. It's kind of in my writings and stuff since, before it came out in late 2017. And the FMCSA, right, they impose the ELD mandate, and then, to nobody's surprise, it causes all kinds of havoc and chaos in the industry for the first few months. And then in 2018, they announced, "Oh, we're going to have some listening sessions. We're gonna get some feedback about how maybe we can tweak this or do it a little bit differently. We want to hear from you." They had those listening sessions before, and everybody told them exactly what was going to happen. And then it happens, and then the FMCSA says, "Oh shit, maybe we should have been paying attention," and then they have to have more listening sessions, right? What do you think is the cause of the government just not listening to professionals like myself, yourself, Lee Schmidt, all the other people who are actual truckers and work in the business and see what's going on out there every day? You seem to be having some success a little bit with some state reps, and I want you to tell me about that. But what do you think the problem is with the people that are actually in charge?
I think we've identified it pretty clearly that there's no voice for the American truck driver. And so I believe those people in charge are, and I've experienced this firsthand here in my state government, that they're only listening to these special interest groups who only have the interest of these mega fleets, these large, top 100 trucking companies in the United States. They're representing the voice of those guys, and they're ignoring, which makes up a very small percentage of the population. I saw you publish those numbers the other day of how much, I think, we did some research on the top 10, trucking, counts in the United States, and they had a census of drivers of about 160,000. Okay. So the top 10 companies in the United States have 160,000 drivers, and we've got approximately 6 million US CDL drivers right now, according to the research that we just completed. And so they take up a very small percentage of the population of the truck driver demographic, but they have all of the representation. They have all of the voice in Washington D.C., in your state special interest groups. They control the messaging, and that is the problem. the American truck driver has no voice. And so the reason that we've formed American Truckers United is not just for the crash victims and that, but that's a big part of what we're doing. It's a part of my heart for helping these people, but it's also in my heart. These truck drivers out here, these American trucking companies, they are suffering. Most of your good American trucking companies right now are bleeding out huge financial losses because they're having to compete with this new group of drivers that are kind of operating in their own ecosystem. And so one of the things that we like to say and want to share with everybody is we've got two different groups of drivers right now in the United States. And this has been over the last five or 6 years. You've got the American truck driver and the American trucking company who are investing in all these technologies to be safe and operating in the ways that our citizens expect us to operate in to keep their community safe. And then we have this whole other dynamic, and I'm going to get further into this here in just a minute, of non-citizen drivers who seem to be operating haphazardly in all kinds of ways and violating laws and driver qualification rules. And they've got their own ecosystem over here right now. And this group is taking all of the market share away from the American truck driver. This group is growing at a very rapid clip. And we have, so if our special interest groups want to talk about a driver shortage, this is the reason that a driver shortage is being artificially created. And that's because they're being replaced. It's really not about a driver shortage. It's about a driver replacement. We are replacing the American truck driver, the American trucking company, the backbone of America's logistics infrastructure with a group that has no regard for what you want to do with emissions, no regard for what you want to do for driver qualification, no regard with what our government wants to do with e-logs and all that stuff. And so it's like, what is that? How is it that we put in place all these regulations and all these guidelines to make things safer, but then we completely remove all these things for this other group and then we let them completely replace? You know, and so what is it really about? Is it really about, is all the stuff that we've been doing, is it really about safety? Because we're not accomplishing safety. The roads are more dangerous. And so we've got all these, and then we're not requiring these guys to comply with all that. And so really it's about replacement. The American truck driver is being replaced right now, and it's not right. And we're not going to stand for it.
No, and you shouldn't. And I want to add one thing to what you just said. And it was interesting to me. You talked about the top 10 companies. You know, maybe there's the top 100 companies that have X percentage of American truck drivers, and they have the lobbying voice. So I want to give you the sandwich analogy, right? Or the rock and the hard place, I should say. These very large companies that have the special interest representation in the ATA and then your state ATAs, they are able to compete against these other guys over here who are non-domiciled, non-citizens, doing whatever they want, flouting the law, not maintaining their equipment, not maintaining compliance with any standards, because those big companies are so big that they can operate on much less margins and they can throw their weight around, that they can survive dynamic fluctuations in the market, and they can compete with these other guys. Who they're squeezing is the medium-sized companies, and then smaller companies, family-owned companies, who have a hard time competing against the very big guys, because the very big guys have the regulatory capture. They have the own in-house CDL training facilities where the government gives them money to train new drivers, and those new guys don't get paid very much, so it helps keep their operating costs down. The small and medium sized guys don't have that. And then the small and medium sized guys who are Americans, are trying to do the right thing by their communities, their families, and do everything correctly. You know, they can't compete with someone from Guatemala who's taking their pay, pennies as it is, still better than what they could make in Guatemala. And a lot of this stuff is going home in remittances. And if some guy's just like driving a truck around in America from Guatemala, is homeless, lives in the truck, he's got no connection, no community connection to the United States. And it seems like a lot of these people have no intention of ever establishing one.
They live in their trucks.
Yeah. I mean, you know, some American guys do too, but that's a small minority. But like their intention is to just come here, parasitize off the American economy, send that money home, and then eventually they're going to go home. It's not about like immigration and assimilation. It's just a work camp. They're just here to work and then leave. And our own companies are taking advantage of this. And then, companies like who you work for and your associates work for, the kind of people I like to work with, we're all getting squeezed. And, like there's a website called FreightWaves. One of the sections on their website is completely dedicated to trucking company bankruptcies and layoffs. In 2024, man, it's off the hook. It's in the tens of thousands of people who've just been laid off. Their companies have closed up. They're in bankruptcy protection. As you said, they're bleeding out. They've got no money. Even this morning, we're getting reports of like logistics companies, these 3PLs and freight brokers. They hire somebody off of a load board. That driver shows up at a facility to get loaded. They don't know how to back the truck in. They get lost at the facility, drive around, knock over a power pole. They do the investigation. Driver doesn't speak English. He's got some temporary non-domiciled CDL that was issued by the state of New York or New York City or something. And, wintertime, running around in flip-flops, totally unprepared for the weather. Like, where did they find this guy? Why is this guy's company allowed to compete in our market? Like, what's going on,
So I want to elaborate a little bit further on what you were saying about the megas and this new group of drivers that we've got, and the American truck driver being squeezed in between. And so a part of our research and analysis, we've been analyzing the loads that these guys are moving, and we have a lot of rich data. I'm not going to get into all that, but we have a lot of rich data on all of that and how that's taking place. And what we've identified is all of the long haul business, all your coast to coast stuff from like California to New York, California to Florida and the Carolinas and Pennsylvania and all that stuff, that good 2,500, 3,000 mile stuff where a driver doesn't have to spend all week at docks. He's just spending his time running his 11 hours and driving down the highway, completely dominated by this new group of drivers. Your middle American trucking companies and drivers have almost little to none access to that anymore. They own that market share. And so what you were describing a while ago was us kind of being squeezed in between. So let me tell you who owns the other side of it. Your mega fleets have always specialized in some of your shorter length of hauls because of hours of service, them trying to manage their freight networks and keep everybody running legal. They focus on that stuff that's 500 miles or less, which can kind of utilize a guy's day, probably a little bit less than that. So what we've noticed in the trends is that a lot of those middle-sized trucking companies, your 100 trucks, 200 trucks, 300 trucks, they were kind of on what we call tweener lanes in between the long haul lanes and those short lanes, and they specialized in what the mega fleets couldn't do efficiently. And then what the drivers didn't want to be gone all week or for 2 weeks at a time. They were in that in between your 600, 700, 800 mile lanes, 900 mile lanes. And so there's been this compression. You've got this group of new non-citizen drivers who have completely dominated your 2,000 mile lanes, your 1,500 mile lanes. And now they're getting down into the 1,000. They have nowhere else to go. They've already captured all of that market share. And so now they're pressing down and they're winning all this other stuff. And so your middle-sized carriers, they're all being forced to compete with the mega fleets now because they're losing this business. So now they're pursuing the shorter haul business, which is less efficient. It's got higher deadhead. It's got more time at docks. These guys aren't used to operating in that mode. So they are absolutely getting crushed and bleeding out. And the mega fleets are sitting there just kind of dominating that space still. And so you are absolutely correct. What's going to end up happening, they added 340,000 drivers in 2024, according to our statistics, during the worst freight environment that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And according to the CEO of Heartland Express when he was trying to explain his dismal results back in December, he said it was the worst environment that he had seen in his 40-something years. Okay. So how is it possible that during the worst freight environment that we've ever seen, the number of drivers goes up by 340,000 on the population? Everything that I'm seeing, I'm hearing from different special interest groups that membership counts are dropping. So fleets are going out of business. They're not adding new members. How's that possible? So how are we adding 340,000 drivers when we know that the American trucking companies are on their deathbeds?
Yeah, so let's get into that. You have this great chart that ATU produced, and it's on your Twitter account. and I'm guessing it's also on your website. And this is, I've had a few people I've been speaking with before our interview who are very interested in coming to understand what's going on with these numbers, right? So you've got them listed as what you call dumping states, and in your research, you've found all of the CDLs issued per year per state, and then you start seeing these weird spikes. So I'm going to go through the chart here. So let's see Texas. In 2020, the state of Texas issues 21,432 CDLs. In the year 2021, Texas issues 124,360 CDLs. That is a jump of over 5 times. Let's see here. Kentucky, 2023, they issue 1,545 CDLs. 2024, Kentucky issues 53,686 CDLs. That's astronomical, right? Who else we've got here? Minnesota, 2022, they issue 2,761 CDLs. 2023, they issue 50,627 CDLs, and then in 2024, another 43,870. Right? What's going on in Oregon? 2021, Oregon issues 1,300 CDLs, and in the 5 years previous to that, it was about the same: 1,100, 1,300, 1,600. 2022, they issue 98,899 CDLs. What is going on here?
I would say, those numbers are astonishing. They're inexplicable. We still have yet to have anyone explain to us what this is. And we started with the question of what in the world is this? And I'll tell you how we come across this. We discovered it. So I was talking about the memorandum, and I want to talk about how we get to this, how we get to finding these numbers. And I would start with, I never knew what a non-domiciled CDL was. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never hired a non-domiciled CDL. I've never had anyone apply with a non-domiciled CDL. I mean, I've never been exposed to any of that. And so there was a bill drafted. And so, after we started American Truckers United and we decided to start working on this investigation, I also got up and started speaking at several events here in the state of Arkansas to gauge the awareness of the public to what exactly was happening, and to find out if they knew that a bunch of non-citizens were out here driving on the interstates. And so I got up and spoke at several political events and gave some facts on the issue to gauge. I was met with complete outrage. Number one, no one knew that this was going on, and everyone was outraged that it was taking place. And so I did that a couple times, and I ended up speaking at one where there was a lot of legislators in attendance, which worked out really well. But at the same time I was giving these speeches, a bill got introduced in the state of Arkansas. And the bill was to change the language in the state of Arkansas to add that. So current Arkansas state law says that a commercial truck driver has to be able, or has to have a license either from a state in the United States or province of Canada. That's current U.S. law. They were attempting to change the language to add that a person could have a non-domicile learner's permit, and to strike the language state of Arkansas or state of the United States and Canada and replace it with a foreign jurisdiction. So the new language would read that to operate a commercial vehicle in the state of Arkansas, you can have either a commercial driver's license or a non-domicile learner's permit from any foreign jurisdiction. So I'm up speaking to all of these groups about public safety and my concern for non-citizens, and a bill gets introduced in Arkansas, and man, I'm outraged. I'm like, what in the world?
I just want to clarify again what you just said in that language. Arkansas literally wanted to change the law so that in order to drive a truck in or through Arkansas, you needed an American issued CDL or one issued from a Canadian province.
That was the existing language.
That was the existing language, and they wanted to change it to add any foreign issued learner's permit?
Correct.
So not even a full commercial driver's license from another country, just a learner's permit from
Just
another
a
country.
learner's permit from another country.
Any country, any language, doesn't matter. Just a learner's permit on some kind of official or maybe even unofficial looking document saying, I got a learner's permit from Ethiopia or Guatemala or India or wherever, and now you're good to go. No, you don't have to like go and like do a new road test in Arkansas. You don't have to pass any other thing. You just rock up, show them your foreign learner's permit, and you're good to go.
Correct. And
that's
not
insane.
Man, tell me about it. So I was speaking at these events when a congressman come up and said, hey, I've got this bill I want you to review. And so when I opened it, that's what I found, and I was outraged. And I let him know very quickly that this is the opposite of what we should be doing. And it was a little confrontational, but I think, you know, in all things, in all situations, God's using it for something, and I think He used that to kind of set me in motion on what He wanted me to do. And that was if they can file a bill trying to change the language to make it easier for this activity to take place, then we can file a bill to make sure that it doesn't take place. And so that just started the wheels of what you're seeing us doing here in the state today. But that was also the reason that's important is that was the very first time that I'd ever seen the words non-domicile. And that was written in the bill. And so it intrigued me and my partner, and it was like, well, what is non-domicile? What even is that? We started researching that, and we found that these states are able to issue commercial driver's license to non-citizens of the United States. And before that time, I had no idea that was possible. And so we thought, wow, so how much of that activity is taking place? And so that kind of started a further investigation of the data that we were analyzing. It's like, okay, not only now are we looking for foreign driver's license, which is what we've seen, not only are we looking for drivers that don't have CDLs, which is stuff that we had seen, now we're looking for guys that do have CDLs that have been issued to them by these states that are non-domiciled, that the states are issuing to non-citizens of our country.
How many other states are doing this besides Arkansas?
Well, and so there's a difference here. The language that they were addressing, which we don't fully understand yet, that they might have been addressing it from the perspective so they could start issuing these more. It was in the reciprocity section of the law where we found it. So what we believe is that our enforcement agencies, our officers, were running into so many of these guys that had all of these licenses from these other states. They don't speak any English, and the enforcement officers are confused, and so I believe they're trying to address what's taking place out in the market, and to try to put some language around that. And so our data that we've done doesn't show that there's a problem with this taking place currently. We haven't found it yet that Arkansas is issuing these licenses. What we're dealing with, and what the majority of the country is dealing with, is that these drivers, when they're issued these licenses, there's reciprocity from each state granted to all these other states because we all trust each other. We're supposed to all be following a certain standard, and we're supposed to be following the regulations for how we issue all these things and doing things all the same way. Well, I think what we've identified for everyone is that that's not the case. Everyone's not participating in issuing things the same way. And so Arkansas is the victim here, where all this stuff is coming through our state, and we're having to deal with it, and we're trying to understand it. And so that led us into further investigation of where that stuff's coming from. And that's how we ended up to the numbers that you were describing a while ago. Was through that investigation, we were like, okay, well, where are these guys coming from? And so in a part of our analysis of the data that I was describing earlier, where I talked about, what lanes these guys were grabbing, it's like, well, who are the guys that are owning all of these lanes? What states are they coming out of that kind of own all this long haul stuff now? And we were able to pivot that to there's a graphic that we put out called labor dumping, and when we talk about the effect of labor dumping on the United States, and that's because we had identified that certain domicile states were starting to control the majority of the market share of the freight. And so we identified that first, like these states have a grip on the control of the market share of all this long haul stuff. So what is that? And as we investigated that, we tried to find the math for it. And then we went to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration website for driver counts. And look, this data that we're sharing with everybody comes straight out of there. Number one, it comes from the fact that we already had knowledge that there was something going on in those states. So it's not just the numbers. We already had knowledge that these states were gaining a significant amount of market share in the trucking industry, and we didn't know how or why. And then we get to the math, and it's like, okay, well, they're also seeing a significant increase in the number of drivers that are coming into those states. So we have common denominators here that say something is going on out of these areas that is contributing to their ability to capture a bigger market share of the trucking industry than everyone else.
Right. So one of the questions about these spikes in numbers, and I'm wondering if there's anything you've found, just to play devil's advocate and be skeptical about this. Obviously, COVID happened, and there was a big spike in the market in 2020, 2021, as all the lockdowns and mandates come in. Everyone's hiding out at home. Now everybody's ordering things from Amazon and other companies online, and there's a massive increase in freight. I just don't know, in looking at your numbers, that explains the whole story. And also, even if that's the case, how does that explain these like 5 times license issues in places like Texas, or like 100 times in Kentucky? Like, it just doesn't, something's not adding up here.
Yeah, look, did we have a good trucking market during COVID? Absolutely. Did people enter the industry during that time? Absolutely. Who were those people? I think that's the question that should be asked right now. Can we identify exactly what group that was? Was that I talk about these 2 different groups that we've got right now. We've got the American Trucking Company group and the American Truck Driver group, and then we've got this non-citizen group of drivers. During that COVID wave that everybody likes to talk about, which group was it that grew? And so what we're trying to tell everyone is that this American trucking group probably grew a little bit, but this non-citizen group grew a lot and has continued to grow a lot every year since. So don't let them fool you by saying, everybody got rich in trucking in 2021. Everybody and their brother could go buy a truck and join. All those guys that did that jumped in on the way, they're done. They're already gone. They've been gone. This industry has been so bad for the past two years. Those guys have long been pushed out of the business. Okay. I think the thing that you should ask yourself is, how is it that wave is continuing? Because the wave that we've identified by the data that we've shared with everyone is that we added 340,000 drivers in one-time waves in 2024 when things are peaking out and things are getting worse. When I say peaking, the recessionary environment that is continually getting worse. And we're adding just as many drivers as what they tried to call a COVID wave. No, we don't have a COVID wave. What we have is we have an immigration wave. There's an immigration wave that's affecting the trucking industry that the representatives of that small group that I was describing earlier that have all of the voice in Washington, they like to call it the COVID wave, but what it really is an immigration wave.
Right. So I'm going to share with you, because I'm originally from Canada. I live here in the United States now, beautiful American wife. But, I spent most of my trucking career in Canada and a few other places. What's going on in Canada right now, and something I've been banging the drum about, and most Canadian truck drivers do as well, but again, our representatives and the Canadian trucking industry and its, special interest groups like the Ontario Trucking Association, BC Trucking Association, Canadian Trucking Alliance, they won't talk about it in the specific way that addresses what's actually going on. Is we're seeing the same thing, and it's almost completely from one group of people, and that's immigrants from India, and they've been documenting it now for over a decade. There's been newspaper articles in Canada's biggest newspapers, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail. The Toronto Star was talking about this in 2012 about how, at that time, 13 years ago, the Punjabi trucking community had already exceeded 20% of market share in Vancouver and 20% of market share in Toronto. Now, the Canadian Trucking Alliance admitted this last year that it's over 50 in both of those cities, which is to say a good chunk of the entire Canadian market. And in 2019, the biggest newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail, was doing an investigation because they kept hearing about like these people from India and other parts of the world coming to Canada and like being abused and living like 14 people to a house, and visa abuses and people not being paid properly. So they start to go and look into it. And this one lady, an investigative journalist named Kathy Tomlinson, who I've tried to get a hold of and I can't find her anywhere. Her email address for the Globe and Mail is shut down. It bounces you back. Her Twitter account got canceled. I have no idea where this lady is. But she started looking into this, and she found that, oh man, there's an awful lot of this going on in the trucking industry. And she found that there's this entire complex, mostly based in British Columbia, but also in Ontario, where you'll have visa and immigration consultants that are owned by people from the Indian community, trucking companies owned by people from the Indian community, and then they lobby the government and say, hey, the BC Trucking Association says there's a truck driver shortage. The Ontario Trucking Association says there's a truck driver shortage. Give us some visas and we'll bring you truck drivers. And then what these guys do is they have agents in India that will go into the Punjab in northern India and advertise, hey, pay us $30,000 and we will get you a job in Canada. They don't tell, most of the time, they don't tell these guys in India that what you're doing is going to Canada to become a trucker. And they've like this Kathy Tomlinson lady interviewed Indian truck drivers who told her this same story. We paid 30 grand up front. They get us the visa. We fly to Vancouver. And then we are told to go to this truck driving school. We spend 3 weeks learning how to drive a truck. Don't know English. Never went to an English as a second language course. Had nothing else lined up in their lives. They immediately get thrown in a truck. Okay, drive across the Rocky Mountains to Ontario. These guys have never driven anything in their lives, right? She discovers this in 2019. Big old, investigative report in the biggest newspaper in Canada. What happens? Nothing. Nothing has happened. There's been no movement by the government to investigate this program, shut it down, adjust it, anything. And it's only started to penetrate the government's awareness in the last few months because of like Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau's massive unpopularity, and then other visa scams that are going on in other areas of the economy, and people in Canada starting to notice, wow, my 15-year-old can't get a summer job at McDonald's or Tim Hortons or anywhere. Why are all the small restaurants and coffee shops all owned and staffed by Indians? Why is it like, and nobody can get a job anywhere? Because what happens is now there's this other thing that happens in Canada where there's this document called a labor market impact assessment, which you're supposed to fill out to approach the government to say, hey, we need temporary foreign worker visas because there's a labor shortage in our area and in our industry. That labor market impact assessment document has been contracted out. The government analyzes it and approves it, but the people that are going out doing the actual work and surveying and talking to employers are private contractors. Well, what do you know? A lot of them are all Indians too, and they just abuse the crap out of it. And then they also allow students to work, right? So if you're a student in Canada, there's a whole network of these dodgy universities, right? They're not actual universities. They're like these private universities whose accreditation doesn't mean anything, also run by Indians. And then they say to their friends back home in India, hey, young Indian person that wants to get a degree and a job in whatever field, come to our school in Canada. The government gives them the student visas. They bring these students over, again, packing them into these places in Brampton and other parts of Toronto and Vancouver. They're living cheek by jowl, kind of like how they did in India. They're going to a school that they're paying through the nose for, and then they're not getting the jobs because the entire market in Canada is completely flooded. There was estimates I read that there's something like 4.9 million people living in Canada right now, which is over 10% of the total population of the country, who are in Canada on temporary foreign work visas or student visas. And almost all of those people came from India under one of these scams, right? And they've been heavily involved in the trucking industry, and it's gotten so bad. Have you ever been to Ontario, Shannon, the province of Ontario?
Yes, yeah, it's been a long time, but yeah.
Have you been up north, like along the
No,
Trans-Canada
no.
Highway. Okay, when you go along the Trans-Canada Highway, there's two routes that go through Ontario. One that hugs the Great Lakes, Highway 17. Another one that goes up around the top way, Highway 11. They come back together about an hour east of the city of Thunder Bay. And then out of Thunder Bay, you carry on Highway 17 to Winnipeg. That's the Trans-Canada Highway. Most of that is 2 lanes. Most of that is wintertime from roughly late October, early November until April. It gets pummeled with lake effect snow from Lake Ontario, and it's the main east-west trucking route, right? There's no other way to go unless you cut through the US, but a lot of Canadian trucks are heavier because we have higher weight limits, and you have things like B trains and triaxle trailers that are way heavier than what they're allowed to be in the US, so they have to go through Canada. And it's literally a massacre. Every single day, there's a new accident somewhere on Highway 17 or Highway 11. A lot of these guys are really aggressive drivers because they're trying to fight their ELDs, or maybe that's just how they are. It's all of the local newspapers are putting out reports every day. There's Twitter accounts like Skilled Truckers Canada, and there's this other weirdo named 401 Desarpinch posting like videos from front-facing cameras, people in pickup trucks getting past. It's carnage up there. I talked to a truck driver for this podcast a couple days ago from Nova Scotia, and he hauled a load from Nova Scotia to Manitoba, right, for a friend of his, a business colleague, and he said he got stopped 4 times in one trip to highway closures because of accidents caused by truck drivers. 4 times in one day to go, 700 or 800 miles through Northern Ontario. Now, all of the newspaper articles, all of the discussions by the Ontario provincial legislators begging the Ontario government to do something, none of them mention the rampant abuse of work visas. None of them will mention that it's primarily this immigrant group who've totally parasitized themselves on Vancouver and Toronto's trucking markets, and it's documented and everybody knows it. The CBC did a really, really very shallow investigation into scammy truck driving schools around Toronto, right? They also did not talk about the work visa issue. They did not talk about the who or the why. None of them talked about the fake driver shortage narrative. None of them talked about insourcing. They just are like, oh, they must need more training. And that's it. They will not talk about the economics. They will not talk about the scams. And I'm wondering if you're seeing this same attitude in your investigations of all these CDL number spikes in these different states, this legislation they're trying to pass to let, learners permit guys from other countries come to America. Are you seeing this same thing in the United States?
I would definitely say that there's an element of established people that have kind of controlled the narrative for a long time that are stuck. They're stuck in that narrative. It's going to be hard for them to unwind that. And so I think a lot of what we're experiencing right now is they're being challenged with some very, very cold hard facts that are undeniable, but they're not willing to unwind their narrative. And so there's a group of new people that are showing up into different verticals and spaces that we're communicating with that definitely understand what's taking place. And so there's this battle of narrative right now that we're going to have to knock them off of that driver shortage. Now, look, when we talk about driver shortage, is there a driver shortage? There is a shortage of American truck drivers that are willing to work for slave wages. Okay, undeniably, there are people being pushed out of our industry into other industries because they're not willing to work for peanuts. When they're given more sacrifices than what our tradesmen around. If you look at the other licensed trades, whether it's electricians or plumbers or whatever it is in our community, where these guys are having to obtain some kind of skilled licensing and then enter into these trades, these guys are making in around our area, they're making $90,000, $100,000. They're making a good living, and they're home with their families. Okay, in the trucking industry, we're seeing a decline in not only the wage, but the standard is rapidly declining because number one, we've got inflation that's happening right now across the country. So we've got inflation and a declining wage. Truck drivers are being absolutely devastated right now. And if you didn't have this artificial, what we call it artificial capacity because it's not organic. It's being pushed in on us. And so if we did not have artificial capacity right now, then these drivers' wages would be increasing with inflation. And so, they would have a higher wage right now, but because of the suppressant effect of these artificial drivers, it's not only are they not keeping up with inflation, they're being pushed down. And so it's an absolute nightmare for the people involved in the industry. And I would say, it's getting so bad. There's so much bleeding. It's undeniable that those people that have been hung out on those narratives, they're going to have to make a decision to change, and they're going to have to make it very rapidly because, it's becoming more and more obvious exactly what's taking place, and they're not going to be able to hang on to that. So is there a driver shortage? Yes. Is it being caused by policy and actions? Absolutely. Can it be corrected? I think 100%. We're going to have to pay people their value. We're going to have to pay people more than what we're currently offering to entice people to come in the industry. One of the things, we had the opportunity to present to the American Trucking Association just yesterday, and we had one of our staff members or representatives, whatever you want to call them, do that presentation. And the thing that we suggested was a federal tax exemption. Why not make look, if we've got a bunch of non-citizens working right now in the industry, they're not paying any federal income tax, they're not paying any state income tax. So what would it cost the government to say, hey, we're not going to tax all of these new American truck drivers. Let's make a push right now to increase our American truck driver population and to attract them to the industry. And because we're not currently receiving any tax income off of all these people that are doing this work, let's give them a federal tax exemption to come into the industry. Let's do something to help the American truck driver for one. Maybe nobody wants to come into the industry because nobody's trying to encourage people to join the industry.
Well, no, and what they are doing, the encouragement they have been doing is something that I disagree with, just because I sort of lean libertarian sometimes with economics. And again, this comes back to the CDL mills, right? So we have the non-domiciled area that's also been flooded, but then we have the mega carriers and others who are taking advantage of the narrative to get the government to artificially increase capacity of drivers with people who may not be the right fit for the industry, may not have the right ethic, may not have the right skills, but hey, we're giving them a job. The taxpayer is paying for these people to get CDLs, and then they end up washing out, right? Like there's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His name's Steve Shelley, and he wrote this really interesting book in 2016 called Big Rig, Trucking and the Decline of the American Dream. He was tasked by the California Department of Agriculture to help them figure out why they can't get anybody to haul their produce and do seasonal work, and they keep churning through drivers. And he went and he did the study with a colleague, and he told them the same thing. He's like, look, the state of California is throwing millions and millions of dollars at training truck drivers. It's a giveaway to companies. All of these guys quit within a year because you're not paying them enough. Nobody gets paid detention time. You get harassed by the government constantly, and you're paying fines and getting shut down, and you get treated like a criminal. This job has got material conditions that need to be improved, pay that needs to be improved, and you're just recycling through drive. You're just cycling through them. You're just churning through them. And in that study, they even did an interview with Pete Buttigieg, former Secretary of Transportation. And Pete Buttigieg admitted, he's like, yeah, what we're seeing is that at least 300,000 drivers a year quit. Even the Democrats understand what's going on here, right? But another connection, getting back to your statistics and this question about why all of a sudden in 2020 we start seeing it creeping up, and then it really goes crazy in 2021, 2022, 2023, is this Joe Biden's trucking action plan. What's your theory on the connection to that and these massive spikes in CDLs?
Well, it definitely has coincidental timing, and so we kind of again been in the industry a long time, and going back and kind of doing the research, I can see where they talked to a few news outlets, and there was a little bit of splash here and there, and I've even had made all kinds of amazing contacts over the past year now with people, and some people saying that they were there, and so I was, when we first started stumbling onto the numbers and stuff, we started doing research and we find this Biden trucking action plan, and we go through there and we start noticing some interesting comments that they made on the fact sheet for the Biden trucking Harris action plan. And one of those was, it says major achievements of Biden effort to expand and improve trucking jobs. And I kind of highlighted this and posted it on our Twitter. There was a bullet point that specifically said cutting red tape in commercial driver's licensing. DOT gave states the tools to more than double new commercial driver's license issuances in January and February of 22 compared to 21. States have issued more than 876,000 CDLs since January 2021. And so it's like, wow, that's, that aligns with some of this data that we're analyzing and reviewing. Do we know that that's directly connected? No, we're still trying to understand exactly where all these CDLs come from. And we're trying to, we're still conducting all of that research. Of course, we don't have that. What I would love to have access to is to who the drivers were that come out of these states. Let us investigate that and look into that, and we'll be able to give you more information. Of course, we don't have access to that. But so this Biden trucking action plan was designed specifically to bring more drivers into the industry. Now, what we're here to tell you is that's been accomplished. That was successful in whatever way that they have accomplished that. We have what we believe happened. We're waiting for someone to give us a response of what they actually did. But of course, you can tell by what we're suggesting that a lot of this activity was connected in some way, and so they brought a bunch of drivers into the industry at the same time. When you go back to 2021, when they were conducting this, that's when freight rates were peaking. That's when the standard of living for the American truck driver was actually increasing, and things were going well for the trucking industry, and everybody was doing well. They actually make a comment in there that that truck drivers' wages are increasing by too much, or they're making too much money. There's a comment, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but they actually infer that, hey, we've got a problem here with drivers' wages because they're going up, and so they took action here to bring in to bring in these drivers, and boy, not only they overshot is what we believe has happened. If we had at the time, I think the published numbers were there was a driver shortage in the country of like 80,000 people.
Oh, bogus.
So, yeah, that number is bogus, but the number that you were acting against was 80,000. Why bring in 876,000? And so what's also interesting about this is right after that, so that was the end of 2021. They make an announcement in April of 22, and then that was in the second quarter of 22 is when the great, you hear a lot of these analysts and stuff say it's the great freight recession. It's not a recession. It's an oversupply, but all of that started in the second quarter of 22. So right after all of this new capacity comes in, boom, we have an unforeseen freight recession that is still ongoing today. And I would tell you that it's getting worse. And that's because we don't have a freight recession. We have an artificial supply problem. We have drivers being pumped into this industry. And if we do not have control in a supply and demand balance, if we don't have control over the supply, and it's just growing at a rapid rate, but demand is GDP and freight tonnage, and it's just sitting here at a normal linear movement. That's what you're experiencing. The reason nobody can understand what's going on is because we used to have a cap on drivers. You had only so many could go through school, only so many could come into the industry. So many were leaving. You had a natural ebb and flow that made sense, and it rhymed with what was going on with GDP and freight tonnage. Now you have with open borders, you have a broken supply problem. And so what is the limit to the number of drivers that can enter the marketplace. Well, the reality is there's no limit. There's nobody putting a limit on these CDL mills or these schools or these non-domiciled permits or whatever it is that they're using. There's nobody saying, hey, Florida, you can only issue so many. In Texas, you can only issue so many. No, it's just a free for all. And so how many undocumented or non-citizens do we have in the country? Well, because of open borders, we know that number is astronomical. And so literally we could be experiencing right now, there's an untold number. My dad only goes back so far. Since we've even looked at that, there's no telling how many drivers they've entered since then. As a matter of fact, I can tell you this. If you go look at the used truck market right now for the trucking industry, you can't find any trucks. So how is it in the greatest, I'm just going to use their word, freight recession, oversupply problem, how is it that there's no secondhand trucks available on the market? Explain that to me. When people are going out of business, when drivers are leaving the industry, American truck drivers, American trucking companies are going out of business, American truck drivers are leaving the industry. You started the segment talking about all of the bankruptcies that are taking place. Why do we not have lines and lines of used trucks lined up at dealerships waiting to be bought right now if all these trucking companies are going out of business? Who's buying the trucks? Who's buying the trucks? That's all you got to ask yourself. Who's buying all the used trucks? So I think getting some used truck dealers on your podcast would be a great move. Say, hey, who's buying all these used trucks? As these American trucking companies go out, as these American truck drivers lose their jobs, where do the trucks go?
That's a great question. I also want to bring something back here real quick, lest I be accused of, being a political partisan. I know we're criticizing the Biden administration here. The Republicans, too, are not very good about this stuff. There was a very interesting article in FreightWaves a couple of years ago about a group of Republican congressmen who were saying it's too hard for people to get a CDL, and they wanted to investigate ways to open the market up more and put more people on the road, as if immigration and free money for CDL mills wasn't doing enough for them. They wanted even more. And then there was another story in FreightWaves that was extremely interesting to me about a group of trucking companies in Wisconsin who were lobbying the federal I don't know if it was the Wisconsin state government or the feds, but there was some rule that said the trainers, if you're a trainer sitting in the truck with a trainee, that rule, whether it was Wisconsin or feds, said the trainer had to have had their CDL for a minimum of 2 years to be a trainer. And these guys, these big trucking companies in Wisconsin, I think one of them was Mills Transfer, and there was two others involved, were saying, we want to reduce the minimum amount of time for the trainer to be a trainer from 2 years to 1 year, right? And then we have this problem of some of the mega carriers doing this thing where you're running team and that's your training. So you've got people who literally have got 6 months of experience in the passenger seat teaching somebody who's brand new, and they're supposed to be running team. So the trainer eventually gets in the bunk, and this person who's only just got their CDL fresh out of school is now going down the road with no supervision, right?
Completely crazy.
Yeah. So over and above the immigration stuff, we already had a pre-existing problem with the government shoveling money at CDL mills that were producing low quality graduates who usually left the industry within a year. There's been studies done on this. The people who cause the most amount of incidents on the road, whether they're driving a car or a truck, are people with less experience. Right. If we are not holding on to drivers that have lots of experience and lots of skill, if we are not honoring them with appropriate market wages and they quit, your entire driver fleet is now all rookies or people that have no idea what they're doing. What's going to happen? You're going to have an increase in accidents. And I want to bring this back to another graph you shared a little while ago, and that's a correlation between the issue of all these new CDLs since your baseline at 2016 with this FMCSA waiving the English requirements, and then this slow and steady increase of truck-involved collisions on American highways. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, going back to that chart, identified that baseline, that benchmark being 2016 when the policy changed. If you look at the years prior to that period, you can see, going back to the natural ebbs and flows. One year you'll have a decrease in incidents, the next year you'll have an increase, and the patterns seem to make a lot of sense. But when you look past that period, you see just a continual increase year after year after year, with that increasing, pretty extensively in the year 2021. And of course, when we made that graph, when we made that chart and that observation, we didn't know about these non-domiciled CDLs and all that. But so the increase in 16 comes from the memorandum, and then the increase in 2021, we believe, comes from the actions that were taken to increase driver supply. And so it was done in a way, to your point, not only do we have non-citizens not speaking English, but we also have all of these new inexperienced drivers entering the workforce. And so the roads are definitely more dangerous. We've identified, if you count the number of incidents over the baseline from 2016 to now, saying, okay, we agree there's going to be a certain number of incidents that mirror, prior existing standards. But anything above that is contributable to what we're describing as policy changes and things that are going on in the industry since that point. There's over 7,175 trucks that have been involved in fatal truck crashes above that baseline, and over 170,000 injuries.
That's an awful lot of people who are scarred for life and people who are 6 feet under.
That's absolutely right. And so, again, that's the number of trucks involved in the accident, but we think that's a national highway safety epidemic. We think we have a huge safety epidemic problem here, where because of the technologies, because of the investment, because of the cultures, one of my partners, Harvey, he likes to always talk about the natural self-policing as Americans that we do out of respect for, our communities and our own businesses, and just the culture that we have here in America to do the right thing. And so there's an element of that that's kind of being destroyed right now, where we want to invest in these technologies. We want to follow these regulations because we care about the communities that we live in. We care about the country as a whole. And the thing that we're struggling with is, as we've made these policy changes and implemented all this different stuff, with all these new crashes, these new drivers that we're bringing in, do they have that same culture? Are they as focused on self-policing themselves and regulating themselves so that we don't have to write all these laws and put them in place? He likes to talk about how we've always maintained this culture, the safety culture, and this atmosphere because of the high regard that the American trucking industry has always had with working amongst our people.
I would say it's deeper. I would say it's also part of being an American. There's a tradition from the founders of self-governance, right? Yeah. They're trying to get away from King George. We're trying to do our own thing here. That requires people to govern themselves, right? That's baked into the cake with being an American and growing up here. And I think one of the reasons our road systems work so good, there's a culture of driving. Everybody likes to complain and say, oh, those Florida drivers are bad. Oh, those New Jersey drivers are crazy. There's going to be bad drivers everywhere. That's sort of part of the deal. But at the end of the day, we mostly get along on the road because of this sort of self-governing attitude, because we get along, right? And there's nonverbal communication. You come to an intersection, it's ambiguous who has the right of way. People wave each other through. Truck drivers would always give each other the lights when one guy was passing another, talking to each other on the CB, warning ourselves about, snow or cops or accidents, helping each other with directions. There's a sort of a spirit of cooperative conviviality that's baked into American culture. It's not just about driving. It's just that's the way it is here. And then it's expressed on the roads. What happens when you mass dump a whole bunch of people from other parts of the world that did not, over and above not speaking English, over and above probably not being trained correctly, they don't share that culture at all. They didn't grow up in it. They don't have it. It's something that's very difficult to teach until you've lived here a long time and you sort of get it. That's something I think people, in a lot of discussions about trucking and even other industries, there's this big reference on tech. Everyone's a tech fetishist. technology is going to save us, and they're forgetting the human element. Even when you're using technology, you're still a person. Even when using technology, you still have to interact with other people. We're still in communities. We still have to get along. We have to share the road. The road is a community space. You cannot forget the human element. And unfortunately, a lot of people that have really bad case of spreadsheet brain, they think we're just all the same. We're like interchangeable labor units, right? Like I use the term human resources slurry a lot. I heard that from a old colleague from a different podcast. I think it's great, but the forces that let's say they're friendly with a certain type of Chamber of Commerce Republican or the people that support Biden, they're just all into globalism. Like everybody can just move around, and then when they actually do that, it's proven that you can't, because these people don't have that American convivial, cooperative, self-governing attitude as you've just described.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying too about the partisan side of it, this is what we're talking about here, what you just described and what I've been describing. It's a nonpartisan issue. We're talking about public safety, right? And so when we're talking about public safety, all sides can agree on this. What's good for a blue state is good for a red state, is good for the country. And so we don't see this as a partisan issue. Who was in office at the time? I think because of the voice of the special interest groups, it doesn't. What we've observed is it doesn't matter which administration or group it is. There's this voice coming out of our own interest groups that are kind of steering them, and what we described earlier in the podcast. And so we don't see this as a partisan issue. We see this as an American issue, and we've got to do what's right for America.
In what's doing right for America, what's right for Arkansas, you've been working with an Arkansas state representative. I believe his name's Wayne Long.
That's right.
Right. So what is it you and Representative Long have been up to?
Yeah. So when I mentioned earlier that I got up and was doing public speaking, I was doing an immigration reform. There was an immigration reform meeting in one of our county committee meetings, and I was one of the speakers, and Representative Long was in attendance. He was one of the guests there, and so I got up and gave the speech on exactly what was going on in the trucking industry and explained it. And typical to my normal reaction that I'd experienced in prior meetings, there was some gasping and awing coming out of his constituents, and so he observed that. Of course, all the other legislators observed that too, and I had several of them come up and talk to me after the meeting and say, "Look, I really want to help you with this." And I'd mentioned that I'd tried stuff on the federal level and got shot down by our special interest groups, and so here's one of the things that I've observed too. As we try to make changes, as you go talk to your federal representatives, as you go talk to everybody, they immediately go back to the special interest groups and ask them what should we do here, and so that's really kind of a problem with the way the whole system works, I believe, because if they're only representing this small collective, then it's hard for the American truck driver to get their voice to these representatives. So I experienced that firsthand. And so Wayne ended up calling me one night about probably 2 or 3 weeks after the presentation. He said, I've been thinking about it. I want to help you. What can we do on the state level? And I said, well, they were trying to make a move on the state level, so let's fire right back at the state level. And so we drafted a bill together, tackling the issues that we've identified. And look, it's been a long slog. I've never been involved in politics or doing anything of this sort, much less being part of a bill drafting. But it's been interesting to kind of see how the political machine works, and it's definitely not set up to favor the American truck driver. It's not set up to favor the American motor public. It's really set up to favor these special interest groups and their lobbyist efforts. And so but I've got a great congressman working with me. He's a constitutionalist. I mean, he's all about states' rights and really he's for the people. Great guy. I couldn't have prayed and picked out a better person than the door that God opened here with Representative Long. And so as we've been able to explain the issues to him, he understands completely and is able to point to the legislation that needs to be touched on and how we need to move forward. And so, we filed that bill this Monday, and It's in process now, and so the way that works is, we'll be called up for committee hearings. Will be the next thing. You'll get appointed to committee, and then there'll be hearings and testimony, and then that'll be recorded, and we'll get to go through that process, and then it'll go up for a vote, and I feel very confident that we have the votes. What'll be interesting here is to see what forces, and I think this is good for all of the American truck drivers, is to pay attention to what forces are opposed to us in this effort. Because everything that we're putting in here, everything that we're focused on is on public safety, number one, it's on immigration, and it's on economics. And so there's nothing in here that's bad for the American trucking industry. There's nothing in here that's bad for the American truck driver. And so, it's going to be really interesting to see who supports us, who works with us, and where the fight comes from against us.
Have you had any interaction with or questions or dealings with the insurance industry? Because something a lot of people ask me is how are all of these non-domiciled, non-citizen trucking companies being insured, and why are my rates going up? Right? Because everyone sees that their car rates to drive a car, the insurance is really expensive these days. And I interviewed an insurance adjuster, salesman, a guy who's been in the trucking insurance business for over 30 years, a couple of years ago on my podcast. And I asked him point blank, I said, I've been in the business for 25 years, never been in a collision, perfect driving record, clean abstract, 4 countries, experience out the wazoo. I should get a really steep discount if I go get insurance. And he says, you might get one on the margins, but he's like, the major insurers cannot issue the discounts that are relative to the behavior and good driving records of their customers because of all the payouts going out from all of the collisions and incidents, right? So I'm just curious to know if you've had anybody from the insurance business try and work with you, because as you say, if we, put common sense regulations on who can get licenses, how much training they require, speaking English, and you can draw a line that says this is going to reduce traffic collisions and incidents and accidents, that means the insurance industry is going to save a lot of money. Like, where are they in this process? Have you seen them at all?
We haven't been in direct contact with them, but we are observant of some stuff that's going on in the insurance industry, and so, one of the things that I continue to share that we've been observing is that not all of these guys have insurance, and so there's a critical loophole.
Whoa. Back up. Not all of these guys have insurance. They're driving big trucks down the road with no insurance at all.
That's correct.
Oh boy, talk to us a little bit more about that.
Okay, I'll start with that. There was a wreck in Colorado where a guy was operating a truck, and I think there was a couple of fatalities involved. And he produced an insurance certificate that wasn't real. And so when they did the further investigation, this fleet had almost 100 trucks and did not have insurance on the fleet. And so what they were doing is they had insurance on one truck or 2 trucks, but they didn't have insurance on the entire fleet. And so the truck that was involved in the accident didn't have insurance. And so the problem that we have in the industry right now that would even allow that to happen. So you get pulled over, the enforcement officer can look in the system and see that the company has insurance. What they cannot see is that all of the vehicles are covered under that policy. And so when an officer sees a certificate of insurance, if it's a blanket policy, he might not know that exactly which trucks are covered under that blanket. If it's a scheduled policy, they could see all of the scheduled units. And so we think there's a gap in what the enforcement agency officers are able to look at to confirm that the truck that they have stopped actually has insurance on it versus whether the authority has insurance on it. And so that's a problem. So is every truck in these fleets insured properly? We don't think so. We think that there's a minimum number of trucks that maybe have insurance, and then so there's a competitive advantage there if they're not having to insure all their equipment. And then it goes to the point that you were making a while ago, like who's issuing this insurance? We haven't done that investigation yet, but that's a good question. And I would go the other way too. It's like, for the guys who aren't insuring these guys, because there's, just like we have American trucking companies, there's American insurance companies who are doing things the right way and they're insuring the right people. And so at the same time that we're facing losses, those guys are struggling because the portfolio of customers that have generally supported their business over the years and have maintained their portfolios, they're dying and they're going out of business. And so these industries, these insurance companies, they're losing market share at the same time we're losing market share. And so I would love for some of those people to come forward and start working with us and helping us in this fight, because there's definitely parts of the insurance industry. Look, I'm no expert on how all the insurance stuff works, but they definitely should have a say in this conversation, because we want to keep around the guys who are doing it right. The last thing that we want to do is let these other insurers who are playing in the gray space, they're playing in the gray area, take over market share of the trucking insurance industry as well. And look, that applies across so many different avenues of this whole thing. I say to the truck dealers all the time, like, if these 10 states are the ones producing all the drivers and they're gaining all the market share of the freight networks, like, why is anybody going to have the need to buy trucks and trailers in Little Rock, Arkansas, or in Central Arkansas 5 years from now? If they continue to dominate and the market share continues to shift, why wouldn't they buy trucks where they're domiciled? Why wouldn't they buy trailers where they're domiciled? And so I believe there's a market share shift happening too in equipment into those other areas. Now, used trucks, they're going to have to buy used trucks where they're at. But I would like to see the data on new truck purchases out of these different areas. Where are all the new trucks going?
That's a very interesting question. Something else I wanted to ask you, I mean, this is somewhat rhetorical, but, we also have to consider the people who disagree with us, right? So amongst myself and my friends in the trucking area of Twitter, we believe that if, whoever President Trump and Vice President Vance appoint to the FMCSA, if that new appointee were to overturn this waiver from 2016 and say, law enforcement, do your thing. If you believe that a truck you've pulled over and the driver is not capable of communicating effectively enough in English to be operating that vehicle, place them out of service, take their license, do whatever you have to do. Given the penetration of these non-domicile CDLs, these foreign drivers into the market, and then the same thing happening in Canada, where there's so much international trucking between Canada and the US that's now handled by people in the Indian trucking community in Canada. Maybe some of them aren't very good at English either. There will be pushback from people that are going to say, oh my God, the freight market, we're not going to be able to move anything. My business, I had to hire these guys. I have no other choice. I get that a lot. I get some trucking companies that are saying, oh, American drivers expect too much, man. You guys have to be realistic. This is not your father's or your grandfather's trucking industry anymore. Get with the program. Like they almost have this defeatist attitude. Like we just have to accept that our trucking industry is being parasitized by these outsiders and people who aren't playing the game in the same rules we are. Right. So like, what would you say on the assumption that the Trump administration does overturn this memorandum and we do begin shutting down non-English speaking drivers? Someone comes to you and complains about that. What do you say to them?
I would say that public safety comes first. And so the focus needs to be on making sure that our communities are safe, that our highways are safe, number one. And if that has an economic impact, then we need to learn how to address that impact and to come up with a solution to deal with that. That's why we offered the payroll tax exemption on federal income taxes and state income taxes. Look, American truck drivers have been forced out of the industry. That's a fact. And so if we turn it off tomorrow, there will be an impact. There's going to be an impact felt. The difference is the impact is currently being felt by the motoring public and the American truck driver. There are people that are benefiting from from their suffering. That impact will shift from the American truck driver and the motoring public to the people it should shift to, and that are the people profiting currently off of their suffering. And so there will be a correction, and then we need to deal with that so that it's appropriate. It shouldn't be. We've got to keep the supply chains moving. We got to keep our economy moving, and so there's going to have to be an effort to structure that shift, to structure that change. But that change needs to take place, and all of the stakeholders need to come together, identify that we have a problem, and work through that problem together, or else we're going to have a trucking industry that is drastically different than what we've all been accustomed to over the last 20, 30 years. In the next 5 to 10 years, you won't even recognize it.
I would submit to you, sir, like I don't know how often you interact with your own drivers, like, but like I talk to a lot of truckers on Twitter all the time and in my own friend network on the phone. And they're saying that that's already taken place. The trucking industry does not look at like anything like it used to. The truck stops suck. There's a lot of inconsideration with like parking, guys getting blocked in the truck stops that are full, kind of garbage and crap everywhere, bad behavior on the roads. There's a lot of people that are feeling this already, and not just with the pay, but just in the sort of material conditions of day-to-day operations out on the road.
Yeah, and look, I agree with that firsthand. Like, that's already taken place, and that's because we keep putting it off. We keep kicking the can down the road. First of all, we haven't identified the problem, and I think now we're getting to that. We were 20 years ago for sure. But what I'm telling you is, at the current rate that it's going, those guys that are giving you those eyewitness accounts won't even be there to give you those eyewitness accounts. They're going to be completely replaced too. So even though they're seeing a change in the culture and the reality of what they're living every day in their environment, at least they're still there. The way that it's trending, they'll be gone too.
Wow, that's a somewhat disappointing thing to consider. I kind of want to go back on the road. Like I've been off. I haven't driven a truck in over a year and a half. I was laid off from my last job. Hey, imagine that. And I've also got 2 young kids at home. I sort of need to be here now, but like I'm in the middle of writing a book about what's happened to the American trucker, and I hope I get to talk to you again and quote you, because I want you to be in that book. You've got your research and your story are definitely going to be in it. And when I'm done that book, when I've got here's the manuscript off to the publishers, that's all done, I want to go back on the road. I love trucking. My grandfather drove a tank in Europe and came home and drove truck. Both my uncles, my dad's still out there OTR. I want there to be a functional trucking industry because I want to keep on trucking. I'm sure tons of people that want to keep on trucking too. So I've had you here for nearly 2 hours. You've been extremely generous with your time. I just want to know, is there a message you have to truckers and other, quote unquote, stakeholders in the trucking industry who are on our side, who see all these things happening? What can they do? Is there a template? Could they contact you or Mr. Long and figure out how to do legislation? Should they be talking to their local congressman? What can they do to help stop this, as you call it, wage dumping and non-domicile drivers, and help fix road safety and help fix their own futures?
Well, I would finish with this, that, there are currently 2 ecosystems operating in the trucking industry. And I've been describing those throughout this podcast, and that's the American carrier and the non-citizen carrier. The latter group is thriving because they have a business model that allows them to operate with a significantly reduced cost structure. Everyone knows they're here. They just don't know how they operate. So the American carrier has been gutted, is on the verge of collapse, and the American truck driver. The ones who will be left are surviving or the American truck drivers who are left and the American trucking companies who are left are surviving on bank equipment deferrals or their owners' own capital, which will eventually run out. And so if reform isn't implemented swiftly, it's not a matter of if all the American companies and all the American truck drivers will go out that are following American laws. It's not a matter of if they're going to die. It's just when. And so the federal government and the American Trucking Association have an opportunity to make all these wrongs right immediately. The question is, will our government and our association step up and fight for the American domiciled carriers and the American truck drivers who are on the verge of extinction. Fighting for America. Shouldn't that be their core mission? Shouldn't fighting for America be their core mission? American domiciled carriers, American truck drivers. And so the thing that I would say of what American truck drivers can do and American carriers, we need to unite. We've all got to come together in this. We haven't had a voice. We're trying to establish a voice right now. Please go to our website at americantruckers.com. Go to the sign up now page. Registration is completely free. We're doing all of this off of our own backs. We're not charging you a dime. We need your voice. We need to be able to say that these drivers from Missouri, these drivers from Tennessee, these drivers from Kentucky, they all see this the same way. We're all in alignment here. We need to protect the American truck driver, and we need to protect the American trucking domiciled carriers. And if we will bring our voice together, and I know that's hard to do, folks, but literally, that's all it's going to take is us uniting in voice with a simple message, pro-America, America first. We've got the administration for it today. And so thank God for that. God is moving in miraculous ways right now to restore what has been taken from us. And I believe that wages have been stolen from you. I believe that your companies have been stolen from you. And I believe that God will restore that. If we will all just come together, put our voice together, we will see a mountain moved, and we will see God perform a miracle for everybody. So my ask is that you please go to our website and register for free.
Right. And then your website has all of these statistics, which are handy, and those drivers and other members of our community who are motivated to speak with their representatives can take your data and show it to them.
Absolutely.
Take it to, local meetings, take it to your local trucking association. Just let people know. One of the things that amazes me is just how locked in the truck driver shortage narrative still is in people's heads. There's like big trucking accounts on Twitter, like actual truck drivers who happen to be famous on Twitter, that still repeat the truck driver shortage narrative. Oh, I can always get a job. We're short truck drivers. Like, they just don't know, right? And then there's a whole bunch of us that are like talking about this. We understand. And, we had this, you shared a video, and I put us in touch with these guys, WFAA in Fort Worth there in Texas. And they're sort of slowly starting to figure this out, that something's going on here. They had this incident with a subcontractor to FedEx. A couple of people got killed. Driver was from Haiti, dodgy truck driving school in Florida, double broker who's from Uzbekistan, the whole 9 yards. And like, they're starting to get it. So like, we need to keep telling people, like, there's no truck driver shortage. There's never been a truck driver shortage. Our industry is being subverted by corporate welfare and all these non-domiciled foreign drivers that are getting in here very easily. And we have to figure out why that is and put a stop to it. Otherwise, we're all going to be out of a job.
Yeah. And so I guess the remarks that I had a while ago were on the federal level. Like, for federal activity and action, we need to all unite. But there are things you can be doing on the local level and the state level that Gord's describing. And if you go back to kind of what I was describing earlier in the podcast, essentially that's what I did. I just got up. I'm here today, able to speak to y'all and have a much larger audience. But I started just getting up in my local county community and going and saying, hey, people, do y'all realize what's going on right now in your community? Do y'all realize how we're getting all these trucks and why we're having all these accidents? And that went from a county meeting to an immigration reform meeting to state meetings to a congressman saying, hey, I want to help you, to a bill getting written. and so I think, to Gord's point, the number one thing is start speaking. Get up and say, hey, we've got a problem. There is not a driver shortage. We have a supply problem. We have an American driver being replaced problem. And because of that, the culture on our highway is shifting, and it's becoming more dangerous, and we're having a lot more accidents. And we need, hey, community, we need you to get involved with us. We need you to have a say and say that you're with us and that you want to help correct this problem. And you will be amazed at what God will do if you will just stand up, trust him, put him first, number one, seek him and ask him to come with you, and you go with him out into your community. Watch out, because he's definitely moving in my life, and I believe that we're going to see some mountains get moved very quickly here. And I hope that all of our truck drivers will be encouraged by what's possible and will go out and participate in that.
Awesome. That's a positive way to end on it. People need to not feel helpless. They need to feel like they can contribute and help. Praise the Lord and call your local congressman. Get on it. Mr. Everett, thank you so very much for your time, sir. I'm going to have all your links in the show notes. I would encourage people to go to my Substack and subscribe, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. Tell your friends, pass this around. Call the bigger media. If you're listening to this podcast and you happen to, listen to Road Dog Radio on Sirius XM or some other trucking media, send it along to them. I've had a very hard time penetrating the trucking media. I mean, I have some theories about why that is, but spread the word, because word of mouth is the best referral, and it's the best way to let people know what's going on with our industry. Don't just get stuck in your bunk. Get out there, talk to your fellow driver, and let's see if we can move the needle on this. And again, Shannon Everett, American Truckers United. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Way of the road, everybody.